ladies and gentlemen. This is India Tonight, and you're watching the show with me, Sumita Karir, and my colleague Nivedna Prabhu. We're joining you live from our Delhi studios, and tonight we talk about the visit of a United States trade team to India, the first in-person trade talks between United States and India since 50% tariff implementation came into effect, and those talks have concluded on a quote-unquote positive note. Sources say the talks went on for over 6 hours at the Commerce Ministry in Nivedna.
Absolutely. Let's also talk about the fact, Sumita, that both nations expressed points remain. However, such as the US imposed 25% additional tariffs on Indian goods linked to India's purchases of Russian oil and demands for opening India's agricultural and dairy sectors, which New Delhi has firmly, remember, resisted to protect its farmers and MSMEs, Sumita.
Absolutely. In fact, Nivedna, we've just heard from the Commerce Ministry as well. A statement has been released. Earlier, it was released by the U.S. Embassy. U.S. Embassy has called these talks positive. In fact, a statement by the Commerce Ministry also calls these talks positive, and it reads, and I quote a portion from the statement: acknowledging the enduring importance of bilateral trade between India and the U.S., discussions were positive and forward-looking, covering various aspects of the trade deal. It was decided to intensify efforts to achieve an early conclusion of a mutually beneficial trade agreement. And to discuss this big story tonight, we're joined by Rajkamal Rao. He's the Managing Director of Rao Advisors LLC and also an open columnist. We're also joined by David Roche. He's a strategist at Quantum Strategy. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for taking the time out. Let me first come to you, Mr. Rao. What do you make of the statement that's been coming in from both the sides, the United States side, which calls the talks as positive, and the Indian Commerce Ministry's side, which also calls these talks positive and forward-looking, and stating that essentially both the sides are looking at intensifying efforts? How soon do you think we could reach at a conclusion of the first tranche of the bilateral trade agreement?
Very good question, Sumita. Thank you for having me again. You know that I've been very optimistic all along that this will settle, and I think whatever happened today at the Commerce Ministry is one more indicator. I've said on this program several times that this has never really been between India and the U.S. It has always been Trump's positioning globally. He wanted to placate the Europeans by imposing the needlessly silly the additional tariffs on India buying Russian oil. And I think the first light at the end of the tunnel came about last week, as you recall, when Trump essentially called the European Union's bluff and said, well, I'm willing to go even higher. I can even go all the way to 100% tariff on both India and China, provided you do the same. And that was the key, because Europe is not going to be able to do that. This gives Trump a safe way to get out of the 50% the extra tariff, and that will slowly lead to improving relationships between India and the US for the trade deal.
Right, Mr. Rao. In fact, it's always a pleasure to be in conversation with you, and both of us agree perhaps that in terms of how you've been positive, well, we've had the opportunity to be in conversation with you on multiple occasions, looking at the kind of progress that we're looking at here. In fact, we'll come back to you and decode that further. But David, looking at these statements as well, what I want to understand from your vantage point is that what does it really signal to investors? Should they price in a credible path toward a November deal or remain more cautious? How are we looking at this?
Well, I'd remain pretty cautious. The trade representative, who has come to New Delhi, is Lynch, which is not the top trade representative by any means. So his job is to see if there are grounds for a negotiation. These are not negotiations. These are discussions to see if there could be a negotiation. And I would say that the likelihood of both sides wanting to reach an agreement economically has now taken over from the narrative of the independence of India being able to fill the economic gap left by America with the BRICS or whatever. So we have a more pragmatic kind of approach on both sides. I think the Americans are pretty desperate for a deal because they're getting very few deals, and because they probably have woken up to the fact that alienating India is not a good idea, because then you've got China, you've alienated China, you've alienated India, and you've got Moscow breathing down your neck. Okay, now if I can just come for a second to the question of the mechanics, I don't believe for 1 second that the tariffs on India because of Russian oil were thought up by the Europeans. That's simply not factual. They were thought up and came out of Trump's head. What Trump is now trying to do is to make sure that he imposes conditions on Europe as blackmail in order to get out of having to impose tariffs on Russian oil on India. It's a complicated game. But the game is he's trying to get out of imposing any tariffs on Russia because he has this friendship, odd relationship with Putin. That has nothing to do with the Europeans. The Europeans have been pushing for Trump to do more against Russia for a very long time, and he's failed to do it. Now, nevertheless, if this is the fact that the Europeans who are about to sign a free trade agreement with India are not prepared to throw that into the into the loo, into the toilet, which they're not, then Europe cannot comply with Trump's idea of imposing increased tariffs on Russian oil, which would hit India. We can't do that, or they can't do that. So this means Trump will not impose additional tariffs on India for buying Russian oil either, but it does not mean necessarily that they come off quickly. I think the risks of them going higher, like if he did put another 100% on Russian oil, which he's promised to do if the Europeans kowtow to him, then that would be disastrous for India. But I think the most likely thing is that they come down, but I don't think they're going to come down quickly.
Right, Mr. Roche, that's a very valid point that you have made, that these tariffs, these elevated and additional 25% tariffs might come down, but might not come down so easily and so quickly. And let me take that point across to Mr. Rao. Mr. Rao, would you agree with what David has to essentially say? Could investors be looking at some ease coming in as far as these additional tariffs are concerned? And would they be factoring in a 25% tariff cut, especially as far as these talks are concerned?
Right. I think I partly agree with what was said. I think you should look at this problem like in two tranches. There is the bonus tariff or the surcharge tariff on Russian oil, and then there is the core 25% tariff about on garments, shrimp, gems, jewelry, so on. So I believe that the Russian oil tariff is going to go away relatively quickly. Because the thing is, at least in the markets, there is a sense of hypocrisy here. We talked about the EU, right? I mean, both Hungary and Turkey have been continuing to buy Russian oil all along. Why aren't they being targeted with a tariff? Why are the remaining European Union countries, they're allowed to buy Russian gas and they're not being tariffed? So why is it only India that is being targeted? China has not been targeted. So the thing is, that's the reason I believe that he tried to go, Trump did try to put some pressure because he wanted to appeal to the Europeans. I mean, today, as you know, he's going to be going for a state visit to the UK. He's going to be wined and dined, red carpet, everything. So he wanted to do his piece primarily to satisfy Starmer. But then, if the Europeans aren't going to go along, if they continue to buy Russian oil and Russian gas, what is the point in holding India responsible? So I believe that the surcharge tariff on Russian oil is going to go away. I think markets will start pricing it in slowly. But I agree with what was said. There are some tough things ahead. I think India's refusal to make any accommodations about agricultural goods and protecting the small scale industries, that I think will be a sticking point. And I think there are some issues, but let's see what happens. I hope that these talks will take place in true spirit, and we will we'll get to an end.
Right, Mr. Rao. In fact, as you pointed out, let me take that back to Mr. David. Mr. David, with the fact that what Mr. Rao has just pointed out, that the Russian oil tariff will go away quickly, and we're also looking at a sense of hypocrisy in the market. While, of course, the earlier point that you were making about, David, that you noted the likelihood of this agreement has taken precedence and that both sides are taking a pragmatic approach as well. But when you're essentially looking at how all of this is playing out from a market perspective, what early signals would that suggest?
Oh, I think the first thing that I would look for, and I'm not saying that's going to happen, I'll come back to that in a minute, but if I was to get optimistic about the US basically wanting to do a deal with India, and it's the US that has to take off the tariffs. India didn't do anything. So the first sign would be the oil tariff. Now, if I can just dwell on that for 1 second, the oil tariff is very much a two-way bet. In the normal course of events, if they're going to be pragmatic in reestablishing proper economic relations, the oil tariff should come off. But if by any chance Trump starts to take maverick and dramatic action with or without the Europeans kind of kowtowing to him on his blackmail conditions, if he starts to suddenly get annoyed with Putin and puts the tariffs higher on Russia, don't forget there's a big bill in Congress which would do just that and may get passage. Then at that point, the tariffs could go up on the oil and not down. So I just want to make sure that people understand that this is not a one-way bet. It's a two-way bet, and two-way bets are always risky. So I would say if I was to get optimistic about this, it would be the oil tariff coming off and negotiations proceeding on the other economic relationship with India, which is its normal trading relationship. But beware, there's a possible two-way bet in here on whether those oil tariffs go down or go up. I think the most likely is down, but I wouldn't put 100% on it. In fact, I would keep it at between 50 and 60%.
Absolutely, David. And even as you speak, we've seen several statements come out from the Donald Trump administration. Of course, officials from his administration attacking India as far as those oil tariffs are concerned. Remains to be seen whether the United States is keen on making any concessions related to India's energy trade with Russia. But let me come to you, Mr. Rao. Does India have more leverage this time around, given the fact that Donald Trump essentially extended that that tweet to India, and he essentially suggested that he has a good relationship with the Prime Minister of India, and that he's a good Prime Minister, and that India-US ties are on firm footing and they're not really impacted?
I have maintained this all along. This whole thing has been a sideshow. Right now, Donald Trump doesn't feel he has too many friends. The friendship that he wanted to have with Putin was great in Alaska, but nothing came out of it. The European Union leaders are not, they have issues with him. So maybe Trump woke up one fine morning and said, hey, you know what? There is another person that I really like, and I've had very strong relationships with him in the past, and that person is Prime Minister Modi. So maybe it was a wake-up call for him. And now that doesn't mean that the underlying issues are going to go away. But as we have talked about before, this thing has to happen at the highest levels, Sunita. It is not, some assistant secretary of whatever, of trade negotiations talking with the Commerce Ministry. This has to happen at the highest levels. And this is what I also alluded to the last time. I think India can give a little bit, not maybe in the actual details about the trade deals, but I think our Indian leaders, I think, should be, should play the Trump game, and we should. Trump likes praise. Trump likes, public. Trump likes the public to. He wants people to like him, and in the last 4 or 5 months, if you look at any any X post or Facebook post or even television program, the coverage on Trump has been extraordinarily negative in India, for justifiable reasons. But and the Indian leadership has quietly prodded that along. And I'm just saying that we kind of need to maybe let maybe calm things a little bit down, like Starmer is doing. Play the Trump game. I'm not saying that he should Trump that something bigger should happen, but I think if we were to lower the rhetoric down a bit, that could go a very long way, because ultimately this whole thing is about his personality.
Right, Mr. Rao, and I'm pretty sure many would agree with how you put that into context. But David, what I want to come back to you about is, when we're looking at the way this is panning out at the moment, does this renewed, intensity negotiation suggest potential shifts in capital flows as well?
I don't think so in the case of India. I mean, there are a lot of shifts in capital flows, which I would put first. For example, the escalation of Russia war game in Europe should, in the fullness of time, make people realize that some sort of armed conflict on European Union soil is probably inevitable. And at that point in time, I see a lot of money coming out of Europe, and part of that would go into India, obviously, and part of it would go into China. But I don't see these trade negotiations per se sparking off big capital flows into India or big capital flows out of India. I don't think so. If there is going to be capital flows in and out of India, I think it will be motivated by the Fed or by people taking a more negative view of where American assets are headed under the Trump administration and his economic policies. But nothing immediate as a result of what's going on today in India, the negotiations or the discussions about having a negotiation. That's not going to spark a huge capital movement.
Right, Mr. Rao, let me come to you now, and perhaps we have time for one final question. So let me ask you about, the contentious issue of India drawing and firmly maintaining its red lines as far as the agri, dairy and GM crop segment is concerned. We don't want to open up that market for any trading partner. We've not done that earlier. How do you think that piece is going to move and how that's going to pan out? How much will India concede to the United States without actually undermining the regulatory autonomy and, of course, its economic sovereignty?
That's a very good question, Smita. And this is where I have a little bit of disagreement with some of my Indian colleagues. And that is that when you're doing trade, you really cannot talk about economic sovereignty. I mean, trade is essentially give and take. And so there's got to be some give on the Indian side. I'm not suggesting at all that the core agricultural industry India should give in. That is obviously that there are very strong reasons for India to to protect that. But I don't. This is again, as I said, it's about messaging. I don't think we should go up on the world stage, take a big microphone and say, "Well, we are not going to talk about agriculture because that's a matter of sovereignty." I don't think I don't think it's sovereignty. It is plain bread and butter. The Maslow pyramid. It's a question of the living conditions of our people. That's a much better way to portray it. So when it comes to agriculture, I think there are like higher levels in the agriculture industry. I don't know, maybe wine or some other food products, cheese or whatever, that I suppose India could concede on in terms of volume, in terms of impact. I think it'll be a lot less on the Indian agricultural side. Maybe the Indian government can subsidize those sectors, but we really cannot get into a trade negotiation and say it is my way or the highway. There's got to be some give, and economic sovereignty doesn't really play a part. However, let me tell you this: in all the editorials that I've written and even my op-eds, I've consistently maintained that it is very immoral of the United States to expect India not to buy Russian oil. That is a sovereign issue. Where India where with whom India buys or with whom India trades, that is protected under the UN Charter, right? That is sovereignty. But I don't think protecting agricultural imports, all of them, I don't think you can classify that as sovereignty.
Right, sir. In fact, thank you very much to both of you, Mr. Rao and David, for taking the time out and helping us understand where talks will move next and what are some of the concessions that India will give and will stick to its firm stance on some of the sectors which it could agree to opening up to the United States. Thank you very much once again, gentlemen, for taking the time out and speaking to us here on this big story.